There was a 2014 study that showed that Fortune 500 companies were more likely to pick a female CEO if the company was struggling, basically setting women up for the big job, but to also fail. If they did well, fine. But if they failed, like, look, we have a female CEO while failing. And that's what I feel like they did to Kamala Harris. When Biden refused to step aside and not run again, he was supposed to be that bridge. He backed off on that promise due to arrogance. And then he drops out after a catastrophic debate performance, and they set Kamala Harris up to fail.
Chasing praise from activists more interested in ideology than real progress, leaning on slogans and flashing symbolic gestures, that's the story critics love to push. Yet, as Sarah Isker rather weakly argued, Harris's struggles weren't the result of some elaborate DNC plot. The truth, she claims, is that Harris simply failed to lead, establish priorities, and follow through on a clear plan. Sure, she brought certain strengths to the table, but she also weakened her own standing. Remember that bizarre spin? Isgor's awkward attempt to blame the DNC for Kamala Harris's devastating campaign collapse still stands out as one of the more puzzling defenses. What's even more surprising is how little attention Harris's underwhelming performance has received. Instead, nearly everyone else has faced the fury of the so-called woke crowd, while Harris's shaky efforts before and during the race have been brushed aside. And here's the twist, a huge twist. According to Bill Maher, that gloomy Harris narrative doesn't hold water at all. He tore it apart piece by piece.
You're saying 3 months wasn't long enough?
It was too long. It was long enough.
It was long enough.
If they had a primary,
It's not that they didn't have time to introduce. They met someone and they didn't like them.
if they had a primary, they wouldn't have picked her. And if they had,
That's
she would have been
different.
able to
Yes.
rough out those edges that then she basically has to start from scratch with a campaign team she didn't hire that didn't like her, right? It was his team. And so I wonder if that next Democratic person, maybe someone's not even on our radar yet, because frankly, when you look at the history of who's there's two types. The one who waited in line, who was next in line, and then there's the one who comes out. That's Obama, that's Clinton, that's Reagan to some extent.
You've probably noticed how the far left crowd operates. They rarely ever admit to losing. That's why Sarah Isker's arguments feel strained and desperate. And as for Kamala Harris, her record hasn't exactly improved in the months following the election. Before jumping into the latest clip, let's rewind to 2021 and revisit one of the key reasons so many voters turned away from her in the first place.
In this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border, do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border. There are legal methods by which migration can and should occur. But we, as one of our priorities, will discourage illegal migration. And I believe if you come to our border, you will be turned back.
The American people handed her a single task: secure the border. Yet instead of taking decisive action, she stood on foreign soil and delivered a weak message. Her words, "Don't come," sounded less like leadership and more like surrender, a plain admission that the crisis was beyond her control. Rather than confronting the chaos head-on and enforcing the law, she leaned on sound bites and hollow reassurances. To voters, it was clear, this wasn't leadership. It was a failure to live up to basic responsibilities. And she went further. Harris urged Americans to stop using the phrase illegal alien, as though changing language mattered more than protecting communities. Meanwhile, unchecked illegal immigration was already overwhelming cities, straining resources, breaking down neighborhoods, and placing vulnerable children at risk. In the end, her approach wasn't bold action. It was refusal dressed up as rhetoric.
Long after Kamala Harris was installed as the Democrats' presidential candidate, for the media to start rewriting her history. Apparently, she was never the border czar. She never had the most left-wing voting record in the Senate, and she was never considered a liability in the Biden administration. Those verifiable facts are all dismissed as right-wing conspiracies, as is the fact that she helped raise bail money for thugs during the BLM riots. Her tweet is still up. Chip in now to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground.
So much for Sarah Isgor's flimsy defense. Harris's downfall wasn't written in stone, it was the result of her own choices. Instead of focusing on the duties that mattered, she threw herself into every fashionable cause the far left had to offer, setting the stage for her own collapse. Rather than using her political capital to confront the challenges she was actually tasked with, like managing the crisis at the southern border, she spent it appeasing the loudest activist voices. She chased symbolic victories while neglecting real solutions. Americans could see it clearly. She was more invested in signaling virtue than in taking swift, concrete steps to keep citizens safe, secure the border, and bring stability to the chaos.
Trump falsely accuses Harris of donating to Minnesota Freedom Fund, bailing out dangerous criminals. Not only did Kamala do just that, her tweet is still up. Chip in now to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground in Minnesota. She posted that at the height of the BLM riots, and guess what? That link is still active. You can still donate, and there is Kamala's smiling face.
These were the so-called accomplishments Kamala Harris pointed to before becoming the Democratic Party's 2024 nominee. And let's be honest, they weren't impressive. One of her most controversial moves was openly raising money to support convicted criminals who had committed brutal crimes against innocent Americans. In doing so, she appeared to side with offenders rather than with victims, even as families grieved and communities lived in fear, and she didn't hide it. She made those choices in plain sight, almost daring voters to overlook them. So when Sarah Isgur insists the DNC deliberately sabotaged Harris, the claim rings hollow. Harris's collapse wasn't engineered by party insiders. She managed that downfall on her own. Her pattern of reckless decisions and poor judgment made trouble inevitable, and the American people saw it coming.
Vice President Kamala Harris urged followers to support, helped free an alleged domestic abuser who is now accused of murder. Minneapolis police say George Howard got another driver in an act of road rage. He was out on bond, posted last month by the Minnesota Freedom Fund. Now, that is the same group Harris got behind last summer. Its organizers now say they are looking for the best way to fulfill the...
Kamala Harris's so-called achievements weren't just her own missteps. They reflected the broader ideology of her party. She wasn't acting independently. In truth, she carried the full backing of the Democratic machine, simply serving as its torchbearer. Look back at the theatrics when Trump fought to secure the border and curb illegal immigration. Take Gavin Newsom, for instance. He practically declared open war on Tom Homan as Homan tried to enforce California's immigration laws against heavy resistance. In that battle, it wasn't American citizens who received protection, it was those breaking the law. That's the playbook. Undermine the rule of law, turn a blind eye to victims, and embolden offenders. Harris wasn't straying from her party's path, she embodied it completely, and the American people witnessed every moment.
Message for every single person who looks like me, specifically white women. It's time. This is no longer about politics, and you get to right your wrongs of 2016 when you didn't put a woman in the White House who was overly qualified. Now's your chance.
Thank God I don't look like her, because I think that means I don't have to listen to her. But you white women, well, sorry, but this is apparently a life and death matter. No hyperbole there.
What's striking is that many white women saw through Kamala Harris from the beginning. When her dishonesty became clear, they rallied behind Donald Trump instead. And why? Because they understood exactly what was at stake. They knew supporting Harris wasn't just about casting a vote. It meant embracing policies that would put dangerous offenders back on the streets, placing families and neighborhoods at risk. These women rejected the left's empty sympathy for criminals and hollow promises of reform. They chose stability over chaos, law and order over uncertainty, and a leader who pledged to protect the nation rather than shield lawbreakers. Their decisions sent a clear message. Safety and the future of their children mattered more than the fleeting politics Harris pushed. Her rushed agenda felt toxic, and women stood firm against it. Their response was resolute. Not on our watch.
You've been kicking back, drinking margaritas on the beach. But really, you've been hard at work writing a book, meeting with leaders, thinking about the future of our country. Who said that?
If you're still wondering about that bizarre clip, here's the truth. Kamala Harris was promoting her latest book. That's right, what looked like a cringeworthy spectacle was nothing more than an attempt to push sales, and don't be fooled into thinking There was some profound message hiding behind the performance. There wasn't. She was simply trying to appear clever and creative, but instead the stunt backfired and left her humiliated. Yet somehow the Democratic Party holds this up as leadership. What the public actually saw was awkward theater, staged gimmicks, and desperate efforts to seem relevant. Is it any surprise then that her national performance was so weak? Voters recognized the act for what it was. In the end, America dodged a disaster by rejecting Kamala Harris. After all, imagine 4 years of that kind of spectacle inside the White House.
Like these kinds of ear pods that have the thing, because I've served on the Senate Intelligence Committee. I have been in classified briefings, and I'm telling you, like, don't be on the train using your ear pods and thinking somebody can't listen to your conversation. I'm just telling you, that's a little bit more secure.
So what was that rambling outburst even about? At first, it sounded like a love letter to her AirPods. Then, without warning, she flipped and claimed they weren't that great after all. Which is it, Kamala? Does she even know? And of course, there's the infamous laughter, that awkward, misplaced cackle. It wasn't charming. It wasn't disarming. It became her trademark in the worst way possible. Now picture this, Kamala Harris sitting at the head of critical peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. Instead of clear leadership, the room would be filled with confusing word salads, contradictions, and that nervous laugh echoing at the worst possible moment. Calling it a disaster would be an understatement. Allies would be bewildered, adversaries amused, and America's credibility shattered. That isn't statesmanship, it's a recipe for chaos. Thankfully, voters recognized it before the damage could be done.
I mean, there's a lot of personal stuff in the book. I mean, poor Dougie.
You're blowing the lid off of Doug? What's going on?
For example, my birthday's in October. The election's in November. You see where I'm going?
Kamala, believe me when I say I have no idea what you're talking about or where you're going. And frankly, I don't think you do either. I think every sentence for Kamala is a bit of a mystery. She doesn't know exactly where she's going to end up or how she'll get there.
Sarah Isgur wants us to believe that Kamala Harris was somehow set up to fail, that party insiders deliberately pushed her into collapse. But let's be honest, there was never any need for sabotage. From the very start, Harris was writing her own downfall. Look back at her time as vice president. Year after year, it was a masterclass in failure. When Biden tasked her with handling the border crisis, she vanished for months before even showing up. Meanwhile, crime spiked, inflation soared, and America's foreign policy stumbled. In the midst of these crises, what did Harris offer? Not solutions, not action, just awkward interviews, staged photo ops, and a string of meaningless sound bites. Americans could see it clearly. She seemed out of her depth in every assignment Biden handed her. And instead of addressing real problems, she obsessed over woke language, lecturing citizens on what words they should or shouldn't use, as though semantics mattered more than safety. Her nervous cackling, her confusing word salads, and her hollow promises became symbols of a leader unfit for the moment. This wasn't about bad luck. It wasn't about the DNC secretly plotting against her. Harris herself provided the proof of her incapacity, supporting criminals over victims, brushing off the border crisis, embracing hollow theatrics, and leaning on fake woke gestures while hardworking Americans demanded answers. Voters saw the pattern, the confusion, the staged antics, the mistakes, the laughter, and they rejected it outright. Kamala Harris didn't just fail personally, she became the embodiment of her party's failures. That's why the American people turned away from her and chose a different path. Kamala Harris was not worthy of America, and that's the real reason her campaign collapsed.